Well, are you back? Are you there? Because I started already, and I don't know whether you're there. I'm here. Let me start again. It's January 21st, 11 days before the Iowa caucuses. I'm going to talk a little bit about some big issues, that is stocks and the economy. Many of you want to know where things are going. I'm going to talk a little bit about why Ted Cruz is even worse than Donald Trump, believe it or not. What Michigan represents in terms of Detroit schools and Flint water, and why that's a big deal, not only in terms of the people there, obviously. I want to talk about the Bernie Sanders surge, and then we'll get to your questions. I have some book recommendations as well. Before we start, though, I do want to remind you that politics is not a spectator sport, and it's also a matter of reaching out to people who disagree with you. You know, all of us are in our bubbles. Most of you probably tuned in because you probably agree with me. That's okay. But it's important to share this and everything else you have with people who may disagree with you. I mean, as I tell my students, the only way to really learn is to talk with and interact with people who disagree with you. And so your assumptions, your premises, your facts can be challenged. Their assumptions, their premises and facts can be challenged. And we've got to create a movement in this country. It can't be a movement just of progressives and liberals who are believing exactly the same things. It's got to be a movement that also incorporates a lot of people who call themselves conservatives and independents, but who also are being screwed by this economy and feel that the dice are loaded against them, that the whole system is rigged against them, because it is. It's rigged against much of the middle class, the poor, the working class. And if we do create, and this is an important point, if we create a coalition that is based on poor and middle class and working class, and it is white, and it is black, and it is Latino, that coalition has the power to take back our democracy and take back our economy. And this is critically important. We can't let them, that is the powers that be, I'm talking about big corporations and Wall Street and the billionaires and the Koch brothers and others, divide us. And that's what they've done. So reach out to people. Make sure you are reaching out to people and not just talking to or smothering yourself and surrounding yourself with people who agree with you. All right. Now, number one, the stock market. Just sort of an upbeat. The stock market is not doing well, by the way. This is my little stock market. This is starting the conversation about the stock market. Let me just say this. I have a reputation of being an economic soothsayer. I got it because the first week of October of 1987, I predicted publicly, it was televised, I think there is a kind of recording of this somewhere. I said that in 2 weeks the stock market was going to lose 20% of its value. I was debating another person, a policy analyst, a stock market economist watcher, who said that that was not true. And it turned out that 2 weeks after I made that prediction, that the stock market was going to lose 20% of its value, the stock market lost 20% of its value. That's where I have got my reputation as being an economic soothsayer. And people, I was deluged with people with letters, and we didn't have emails quite in those days, but telephone calls, people wanting to sign up for my investment letter. Now, unfortunately, I didn't have an investment letter. I didn't tell them, however, something that I am sort of obligated to tell you, is that prediction I made, that in 2 weeks the market would lose 20% of its value, I've been making exactly the same prediction for 4.5 years, which just goes to prove that in terms of economic forecasting or stock market predictions, if you stick to your guns, eventually you will be right, and you can have your own economic newsletter. All right, having prepared you, let me just say, the stock market, the downturn, does reflect some economic fundamentals. And the economic fundamental, the most important economic fundamental, is that there is not enough demand for the goods and services that we are capable of producing in the United States at full employment. There's not nearly enough demand. There's not enough demand because consumers who make up 70% of economic activity, don't have enough money. We have a shrinking middle class, if you haven't noticed. We don't have enough demand coming from Europe or certainly China, whose economy is slowing down dramatically. Developing nations that have been selling their commodities to China, they also don't have enough demand. Government in the United States, too much of our Congress has swallowed the snake oil of fiscal austerity, and meanwhile the Federal Reserve Board is raising interest rates, which is going to also slow the economy down. So you've got a kind of storm, a vicious potential perfect storm of not enough demand for goods and services, which means, I'm not going to say recession because I hate that word, but things are not looking up, and the stock market is, I think, predicting. It's not always a great predictor, but in this case, the stock market, I think, is predicting some very hard times ahead. Hate to say it, but that's what's happening. Meanwhile, if you look at some of the big banks, like Goldman Sachs, I don't know if you noticed, but Goldman Sachs, one of the biggest banks on Wall Street, Goldman Sachs, its profits are down 71% over the year, but of course, its compensation is up. Average compensation at Goldman Sachs is up 5%. Now, how can that be? Its profits are down 71%. Its compensation is up 5%. Well, that's because Goldman Sachs, like the old other banks, have gone public. They've gone public. They now have shareholders. That was a terrible decision. Banks didn't used to have shareholders. The big banks, the big financial institutions, they didn't have shareholders, so they couldn't play games. They basically have started to play the same kind of games that big corporations play, and that's why CEO pay keeps going up, even though a lot of companies are going down the tubes. All right. I'm getting a message that says, what? Share on Facebook. Share on Facebook. Oh, yes. I was gonna ask you to share on Facebook. I don't know. Yale is saying share on Facebook. So if you could share this on Facebook, then other people will have a chance to watch it. Share it with people who don't agree necessarily with you. And also, you can see this again later if you can't necessarily stay with us for the whole half hour, even if you wanted to. I wanted to shift gears and talk about Ted Cruz. Do you think this is a pretty good caricature? I mean, I did it just moments ago. What do you think? You like it? If you like it, I'll do more caricatures. I mean, I'm a sort of an amateur cartoonist. I like doing it. But anyway, Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz is, in my view, more dangerous even than Donald Trump. How can that be? Well, Ted Cruz, Donald Trump is a bigot and he's a bully and a xenophobe. We all know that. Ted Cruz combines all of those aspects with a vicious right-wing doctrinaire streak. He is smarter than Trump. He is also more strategic. He plays the long game. I know people who know him who actually personally detest him. It's interesting. In American politics, there are a lot of people who are not liked. Obviously, not everybody's going to be liked. And I know that from experience in Washington. But let me tell you something. It's very, very rare that you get a politician that is almost uniformly detested by other politicians in his or her own party. Ted Cruz is among the most detested of all politicians I have ever come across, mainly because he's a one-man band. He doesn't care about institutions. He actually has tried to destroy Congress. He ran across Capitol Hill on a number of occasions to try to get Congress to close down fiscal cliffs. You remember all of that. He was instrumental in the government shutdown we had a few years ago. So if you have any questions about that or my views about Ted Cruz, please do write in. Okay, so next topic. Michigan has been in the news. It's been in the news in two ways. One way has been the Detroit school system, teachers who are going out on sick leave, basically protesting the conditions of the schools. Also, the tragic situation in Flint, Michigan, with regard to the water supply. Lead has leached into the water supply, and that is terribly, terribly damaging to huge numbers of people and kids. Well, what does it represent? I mean, we obviously should be concerned about the people involved, but we also want to understand the background context. For both Detroit and for Flint, these are both very poor, mostly black cities. They are surrounded by much more affluent counties, but they are islands of poverty. With regard to, and that shows up in a low tax base, which means lousy schools, it means water systems, it means both of them are under kind of a bankruptcy protection, as it were. You have a Republican governor, who basically doesn't care, has let both of these islands of poverty and real serious problems become much, much worse. And what's happening all over America, unfortunately, is that we have cities that are overwhelmingly comprised of people of color who are suffering the consequences of being, it's almost economic apartheid. Let's face it. It is a condition in which these people are clustered together, and they don't have enough money to have a good tax base, and so their public facilities and public needs and public services are all deteriorating very rapidly. The state has got to take more responsibility. Other people in the state have to take more responsibility, and the federal government, all of us, have to take more responsibility for these systems. All right? May I go on? The Sanders surge. Well, as I said, we're 11 days to the Iowa caucuses. A caucus is simply a bunch of people meeting. It can be in a schoolroom, it can be very informally, but they caucus in the sense that all the people who want, say, Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton, or in the Republican caucuses, Donald Trump, or Ted Cruz, or whomever, they bunch together, and then there's just a simple count. A caucus depends a lot on enthusiasm. Iowa gets pretty cold. I haven't seen the 10-day forecast, but it's going to be cold. So it kind of weeds out people who are not very adamant and very ardent, unless they're incredibly well organized and somebody calls them and says, I'm going to pick you up, which sometimes happens. But look, this is a big deal. It's also happening in New Hampshire. Now, I have been called repeatedly by network television and said, well, can you appear and talk about Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton's banking plans and compare them, or their tax plans, compare them, or their health care plans and compare them? I'm happy to do that, but you know something? This is not about specific programs or specific plans. This is about power. It's about the ability of Americans to come together and change the structure of power in America. Yesterday, Bill Clinton, my former boss, old friend, in New Hampshire, said, well, Bill, you don't vote for Bernie Sanders because he's talking about things like a single-payer health care plan that couldn't possibly get done, politically infeasible. It would just lead to more gridlock in Congress. That's precisely the problem. It's the political infeasibility of doing stuff that we need to do. It is the gridlock in Congress because people are not actively involved. The importance of Bernie Sanders, the importance of the Sanders surge, is the movement behind it, the movement that Bernie Sanders calls a political revolution. But that movement is the essence of what is happening with regard to the enthusiasm behind Bernie Sanders. In fact, if you look at what has happened in general to so many Americans who are so angry and frustrated because their pay has gone down, they have less job security than ever before, because their kids, they feel, are going to have a life worse than they are. Many middle-class, lower-middle-class people have health problems and have actually shorter lifespans than we've seen since the Second World War. What's going on? Well, people are being oppressed by a system that's not working for them. And they're either saying, okay, the only way out is to support a strongman, a kind of son of a bitch who says, I'm going to fix this, Donald Trump, or somebody who's going to lead a political revolution that's going to organize people and mobilize people and do it through the democratic process. Those are the choices, folks. Which reminds me of one of my heroes. Do you recognize this man? You don't. This is Justice Louis Brandeis. Louis Brandeis. He was a justice of the Supreme Court in the first part of the 20th century. What did he say? What does this say? This is a very important quote. He said, we can have a democracy in this country, or we can have wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, but we cannot have both. Now, he said this in the shadow of the first Gilded Age. We are now in the second Gilded Age. And his words are as relevant today as they were then. We have a choice to make. Great wealth in the hands of a few, which leads to political corruption, leads to the vicious cycle of wealth and power that not only corrupts our politics, but also shifts the market, rigs the market for the benefit of the people at the top, or we can have a real democracy. That's what's at stake. All right, I want to shift now. Are you ready for a shift? I'm shifting. Many people, last week, you wanted to have my book recommendations, what books I'm reading or have read that I want to recommend to you. This is an important book. It just came out. It's called The Lion of the Senate. It's when Ted Kennedy rallied the Democrats in a GOP Congress. I was there. I remember it. Some of you may remember it. It's a great chronicle of what happened, how Ted Kennedy did it. And the brilliant legislator he was. Many people have no idea of not only the good things he did, also, but the bad things he stopped. He and Paul Wellstone, Teddy Kennedy and Paul Wellstone in the 1990s, essentially ran the Senate in a way that made even a Republican Senate work for most of us. It's by Nick Littlefield and David Nexon. Do get it if you can. It's a brilliant, brilliant read. Two other books I recommend to you that are older books, but that explain a lot about what's happening today. One is called Out of Order by Thomas Patterson. This is an important book about what's happened to American politics, how the decline of the political parties and the growing power of the news media undermine the American way of electing presidents. You can see it today. This is even more relevant to today. It's a book by Jacob Hacker and Paul Pearson, two political scientists. It's called Off Center: How the Republican Revolution Eroded American Democracy. Get it. It will give you context. It will give you background. It's important. And finally, let me use this opportunity to give you a commercial. Saving Capitalism for the Many, Not the Few. It's in your bookstores. And it is very relevant, if I do say so myself. Okay, we're ready for your questions, and I hope they've been coming in. Let's have the first question, please. All right. Question from Joseph Havener. Asks, even though Trump and Cruz are getting all the attention, I'm worried about a brokered convention where Jeb Bush gets the GOP nod. Could this happen? It could happen, Joseph. I think it's unlikely. The public would be very upset, particularly if some Republican, let's call it Cruz or Trump or Cruz, Crump. Would that be a good way of kind of combining Cruz and Crump? Trump and Cruz. Crump. So if the GOP crumps, if the Republican Party crumps, what's going to happen? Well, the establishment is already very upset about it, with good reason. But the American public, I don't think, would stand for a brokered convention, which means they substitute somebody they like, rather than somebody who actually prevailed in the primaries and caucuses. Next question. The Republican Party crumps. I like that. Do you? Terry Davis says, what is the best strategy to get more Democrats to vote this November? Terry, the best strategy to get more Democrats to vote is to fire up Democrats with the truth. And I think Bernie is doing that. Let me just say, I am an old friend of Hillary Clinton's. I've known her since she was 19 years old. I think she would be an excellent president. Don't get me wrong. But I think Bernie is telling the truth in a very powerful and very important way. And he was mobilizing people and he's organizing people. And that's what is so critical today. We can't get anything done if we don't have a political revolution. Okay. And by the way, some of you have asked me to endorse. I am not going to endorse. I can't endorse. I am chairman of a very important, to me, organization, citizen group called Common Cause. It is nonpartisan. It does not endorse. It does not allow its chairman to endorse, and I'm not going to. Bruce Wood, would a mandatory balanced budget work, coupled with an increase in taxes on the wealthy and corporations? Bruce, a mandatory balanced budget would be crazy because you need to give government the ability to do what government has got to do in a downturn when there's insufficient aggregate demand, and that is be the buyer of last resort. In the Great Depression, that's what government did. The reason we got out of the Great Depression was World War II, when government had to, we had to because we had no choice, spend huge amounts of money, get everybody back to work, mobilize the entire country. That got us out of the Great Depression. Every recession, every depression we have had, it is government spending as a last resort that does it. So we don't want a balanced budget amendment. That would be nuts. That would be like fighting economic downturns without any ammunition. Evan Grassi asks, do you think a global economy of the same caliber in which no population of people is being exploited is possible? Well, Evan, it depends a little bit on what you mean by exploitation. As long as people at the bottom of the global economy continue to do better, and some of them are doing better. China and India are two examples. If you took China and India out of the statistics, we'd see wider and wider inequality globally. But China and India both are generating a lot of upward mobility for huge numbers of people. And one thing that I have been pushing for years is that in American trade treaties, we demand that other countries have a minimum wage that is half their median wage. Now, the advantage of doing that is that if a minimum wage is half the median wage, and if they enforce that, that spreads the benefits of trade. It doesn't mean that we don't trade. It doesn't mean that they have got to have the same median wage or same minimum wage as we do, but it means that their poor and their middle classes move upward. That's good for them. It's also good for us because it means a larger population of buyers for our potential goods and services. All right, next question. Carolyn Hennis asks, I want to know why all the candidates aren't speaking publicly about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Now, Carolyn, I assume you mean against the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Maybe you mean in favor. I'm against it. I'm against it because not only was it initiated by big corporations and Wall Street, that should not itself be dismissive, that would cause to dismiss it, but inside the Trans-Pacific Partnership are huge benefits for big corporations and nothing for average workers. There are basically, the way to understand the Trans-Pacific Partnership is it is not so much a trade treaty as an investment treaty in terms of global investment. It makes the world safe for large global companies investing all over the world. It means that, for example, if you are a large global company and you have invested in a country that raises its health and safety or environmental protections or even labor protections, and that puts a crimp on your profits, you can go, according to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, you can go to a special mediation group set up by corporations that will award you as a corporation remuneration, reimbursement for any lost profits from the country that increased its health, safety, and environmental regulations. Can you imagine how difficult that's going to make the politics of improving health, safety, the environment, labor laws, even banking laws? I mean, it's a race to the bottom, and it's a very dangerous race to the bottom. Syra Sunandrath, and forgive me if I'm mispronouncing your last name. What's the best way to answer someone who says free markets are the solution to healthcare? Well, what you might want to do is, first of all, read this book, and you understand that there is no free market in nature. Markets are created by governments, and the question is, who is in charge of how governments make those creations? Healthcare is not a free market. There's never been a free market in healthcare. Healthcare is necessarily regulated. Drug companies, pharmaceutical companies, health and safety have got to be regulated. A lot of it is through Medicare in the United States, Medicaid. The question is how we organize these markets. And unfortunately, the markets have been organized in such a way that we get huge benefits for private, for-profit health insurers and drug companies, but we don't get the kind of deals we should be getting. The Affordable Care Act is a great advance over where we were, but the pharmaceutical companies are still charging a fortune. We pay more for pharmaceuticals than the citizens of any other advanced nation, and we have less health care. People are still paying a huge amount for deductibles, for co-payments. This is why I am personally in favor of moving to a single-payer health care plan, a kind of Medicare for all, which is what Bernie Sanders has been advocating. We have time for a few more. Robert Russell asks, I'd like to hear your thoughts on the financial markets. In the past, your opinions have been scarily predictive. Scarily predictive. Robert, I do know the future. I started a half an hour ago, Robert, so you'll just have to play back this tape, because I made all my scarily predictive and accurate predictions then. I don't mean to put you off, it's just that I already did that. Patricia Hoyara, I think there should be a mandatory retirement age for the Supreme Court and Congress. Do you agree? Mandatory retirement, I used to think mandatory retirement was a good idea when I was in my 30s and 40s and 50s. But now that I am in my late 60s, I don't like mandatory retirement. I don't know. I can't explain why. I've just sort of changed my views about mandatory retirement. I don't want to retire. I love what I'm doing. I start my big undergraduate class. I teach graduate students here at the Goldman School of Public Policy, and then I also teach undergraduates, and I have a huge undergraduate class, about 800 students. My first undergraduate class starts tomorrow, and I love teaching. I love them. They're wonderful. Berkeley is great. This is the most diverse economically and every other way place I've ever taught, and the students are so appreciative, and I don't want to stop. So don't talk about mandatory retirement, okay? I don't want to get a single more no more questions about mandatory retirement, all right? And we're going to have to, this has got to be the last question. Well, we have room for one. Yeah, Al just said we have room for one more, all right. I just work here. All right, Corinne Wilson, will you speak to the conflicting information about oil prices, China's slowing growth, and how it will impact U.S. wage earners? Well, it's conflicting, Corinne, only because you would think with falling fuel prices, falling oil prices, everybody would have more money in their pockets, and that's true. American consumers are doing better because gas is so much cheaper. But there is a darker side to that story. The darker side of the story is that as oil prices fall, you've got big global companies, not just oil companies, but all of the companies that service oil companies, all of the banks, the financial institutions. Oil companies are sort of kind of connected, intricately interconnected to the rest of the economy. So it's not just consumers. As oil prices fall, as oil profits decline, given that we're not yet in a non-carbon-based fuel economy. I wish we were. Maybe we will be. But given where we are right now, it causes kind of potential chaos. I mean, you see the whole market is shaking. Global markets are shaking. I think China's decline adds to that uncertainty. Markets don't like uncertainty. As I said before, you have a crisis in aggregate demand. Oil price and fuel prices lowering helps that because we have more money in our pockets, but not enough to nearly offset the decline in aggregate demand. All right? We have one final question. Are you ready? This better be a good question. John Seifert, I haven't read your question, but this better be good. It's because it's the last question this week. We're going to be back, by the way, next week at the same time. We're going to do this for a while. This is an experiment, and we want your feedback. What do you like? What do you not like? What works? What doesn't work? We'll try. John Seifert, do you feel you are more effective in your current role than if you entered electoral politics? Thanks, John. I tried electoral, but I ran, and people don't remember this because they don't know it. Nobody actually paid any attention when I did it. I ran for the Democratic nomination for the governor of Massachusetts in 2001 and 2002, and I came in second out of a field of 5 or 6, and that wasn't bad. In fact, in the last week of that race, I was neck and neck with Shannon O'Brien, who became the Democratic nominee, and she lost to, wait for it, Mitt Romney. Whipped Mitt Romney's ass, if you don't. And we wouldn't have had Mitt Romney. But I didn't. I was not very good at electoral politics. So I don't know whether I'm better at what I'm doing now. I don't even know what I'm doing now. I love teaching. I love writing. And I don't know. I consider myself hopefully somebody who helps you understand a little bit better what's happening politically and economically. And you can't separate politics and economics. So let me, again, thanks to Zoe Beck and Yael Bridge for their terrific help with this enterprise. Yael, thank you. Zoe, thank you. And we'll see you next week.